so now we're back. We're going to talk about the history of economic thought tree. The syllabus file I just did on its own, and now we're going to really begin to proceed to the rest of the lecture, okay, today's material. Okay? In the next 45 minutes, and then I'm going to take a break, okay? In the next 45 minutes, we're going to talk about the history of economic thought tree and the Heilbronner article, okay? If you open up your file, or if you have a printout of it, maybe, the history of economic thought tree, which I listed on the syllabus, okay? That's the first thing we're going to go over today. And if you look at it, you see at the top a name says Smith, 1776. That's referring to Adam Smith. He's thought of as the father of modern economics, okay? Despite the fact that there were people before him who had actually written about economics, there was Aristotle, who actually gave the name economics. He coined economicus. He was talking mostly about household economic activity, though. There was Thomas Aquinas, which some of you may be familiar with, in the 12th century. He said that interest rates should basically be abolished. He said usury is immoral. And then actually in the Middle East and North Africa, there's a man named Ibn Khaldun in the 13th century, I believe. He wrote about what could be called macroeconomics now. And there was also a man more recently in the 17th century, 1600s, named Bernard Mandeville. There was also the physiocrats in France, and a man named Richard Cantillon. I think he was Irish, but he lived in France. But for all intents and purposes, most people date the start of economics with Adam Smith, okay? He's famous for two books. Well, he's famous for one book, but he should be famous for two. In 1776, he wrote The Wealth of Nations, an inquiry into the causes of the wealth of nations, okay? And that's where you may have heard of this term, the invisible hand, which still exists to this day, where people believe that if you allow markets to simply operate and function on their own, it will be an optimal outcome, okay? Everything will work out fine. You hear your politicians say this today when they refer to the free market. The free market is an optimal macroeconomic state, okay? That is a belief the post-Keynesians disagree with, but the neoclassicals adhere to. The textbook Keynesians are sort of on the fence about that statement. But we're going to see that in the future, okay? What he is less famous for is another book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. Okay? The Theory of Moral Sentiments he published before The Wealth of Nations. He published that in 1759, and he worked on that his entire life. In fact, he revised it 9 times, I believe, it might be 11 times, before he died. So he clearly felt that the Theory of Moral Sentiments was more important, right? He wrote The Wealth of Nations, ship it off, okay, it's done. That's how I feel about the wealth of nations. This is what I believe makes nations wealthy. The Theory of Moral Sentiments, on the other hand, he kept revising, okay? He kept wanting to work on it, so he felt there was something very important there, okay? In the Theory of Moral Sentiments, you have to remember, this is the 1700s, right? It's 1759. Feudalism has broken down in the 13, 14, 1500s, okay? And it broke down in the 1600s, really. And then you have this transition to a new political economic order, right? It's called capitalism, okay? And Adam Smith is looking at this system going, okay, well, it's getting people richer, right? The wealth of nations. Nations are definitely getting richer, and on average, people are getting richer. Okay? But then in The Wealth of Nations, he says, is this a good thing morally? Okay? What I mean by that is, in the 1776 book, The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith says, what's the key to increasing productivity? He says, well, you have to increase the division of labor. Okay? Instead of, and he has this example of a pin factory. Instead of someone, you could even say a pen, instead of a pin. But says one person making this would probably only be able to make 10 of these per day. Okay? Right? You have to make the cap blue, you have to get the blue dye, you have to make the tip, you have to make the thing you stick it into in the back, you have to make the casing, right? On the other hand, if you had a guy who made just the tip all day, every day, you made a guy who made the cap all day, every day, they would become much more productive, okay? They'd be much more productive because they could focus on one simple job instead of having to make the whole thing. Same analogy could go for you, right? You have decided to specialize in some career path, right? You don't grow your own food at your house, apartment, what have you. You go out to a store and get it, okay? You aren't a doctor. Maybe you're on your way to being a doctor, but you aren't a doctor. You get sick, you go and see a doctor to tell you what's wrong with you, okay? People have specialized, they increase the division of labor, okay? Even at a doctor's office, a doctor, frankly, doesn't do all that much, right? You have the person who signs you in, the receptionist, then you have a nurse who takes your vitals, then the doctor looks at all of the charts from the nurse and says, okay, you have the A, B, or C, right? That's a division of labor. So you get good at doing one job. That increases your productivity, right? Because a doctor can go around and see 15 patients in an hour, although you may not believe that with the waiting times, but you can see 15, 20 people in an hour, instead of if he had to check you in, take your blood pressure, your vitals, things like that, and then diagnose you, he'd only get to say 3 people per hour, right? So it increases productivity, makes us all more productive. That's what Adam Smith said in The Wealth of Nations in 1776. In The Theory of Moral Sentiments, 1759, he said, okay, well, these people are getting more productive, but he referred to it as mental mutilation. If you're doing one simple task throughout the entire day, you may not actually grow intellectually. And the point, he said, is this moral to do this? So to solve that, Adam Smith advocated government intervention in education, infrastructure, communications, things like that. Okay? From Adam Smith, and that really sets the stage for the divide in economics, the first divide in economics. Okay? You have Adam Smith, and then you have this history of thought tree going to the left and to the right. This corresponds politically to what people have said as well. Okay, they're political leanings. To the right, you're going to get the neoclassicals. Okay? To the left, you get people like Karl Marx. Okay? So, let's start with the right side of the chart, so I'm going to have to move it over. Okay? So you have Adam Smith, 1776, produces The Wealth of Nations, and there's a split that goes on in economics. Okay? The right side, and this is a very important point for the rest of the semester, so write this down, do whatever you need to, remember this portion, okay? This chart can be split down the middle from Adam Smith downwards, okay? Keynes goes to the left side of it, and what's called the bastard Keynesians would go to the right side. Okay, so you can basically run a line down this chart, if you would like, from the bastard Keynesians, which is another name for the textbook Keynesians, there's a lot of them, from the bastard Keynesians, around Keynes, Keynes is to the left, and then up to Adam Smith. Okay, so our line would go this way. Everything to the right of that line can be, all the theories can be summarized under the following sentence. every single one of these groups has an economic theory or abides by an economic theory that states capitalism is a socially harmonious economic system in which poverty, unemployment, and inequality are the fault of the individual. Okay? I'll say that one more time. Capitalism is a socially harmonious economic system, or political economic system, and in which poverty, unemployment, and inequality are the fault of the individual. Okay? In other words, the right side, similar to political leanings, right? If you are poor, it's your own fault, right? You're lazy, you don't work hard enough, right? The way to get rich is to work hard, dedicate yourself, and be entrepreneurial, and you will become a millionaire. Okay? That's the right side of the table. The left side of the table, so from Smith, right, if we have our line again, Keynes goes to the left, okay, and we split between the Eastern institutionalists and the bastard Keynesians. The left side would say that capitalism is an imperfect economic system in which poverty, inequality, and unemployment are caused by the system itself. Okay, say that one more time. Capitalism is an imperfect economic system in which poverty, unemployment, and inequality are caused by the system itself. Okay? That's not to say that in the left-hand side, that's not to say that certain groups certain individuals may be lazy, right? That's not to deny it. There's always going to be trying to be someone who scams the system, right? But what it's saying is, for the right side, that's the only type of people who could be unemployed, is lazy, right? Whereas the left side would say, yeah, sure, there could be some people who are lazy, but there are also some people who want a job and can't find one. And it's not their fault, right, that they don't have a job. It's caused by the structure of the economic system itself, okay? Now, I've intentionally made the statement capitalism is an imperfect economic system incredibly broad, okay? I made it broad because imperfect simply means not perfect, right? When something is imperfect, there would be many solutions to try to fix it. You can introduce, if we accept that capitalism is an imperfect system, if you feel the left side is right, then there's a bunch of different things you can do. You could be like Keynes, who wanted to reform it, right? He wanted to introduce reforms. In the 1930s, at the height of the Great Depression, capitalism didn't seem to be working out for a whole lot of people, right? 25, 30% unemployment, bread lines, homelessness, rampant homelessness. A lot like Europe right now, contemporarily. So, what you ended up having was he wanted to introduce reforms, okay? That was one solution to capitalism is imperfect. Another solution to capitalism is imperfect Another solution to capitalism is imperfect would be Marx, who wanted to overthrow the system, right, and have everyone become communist. Okay? I only bring that up because sometimes in classes, when I've said capitalism is an imperfect economic system, people think that means we need to abandon it. That's not true at all. Okay? The easiest analogy I can give for you is if you've ever dated someone, right? Every human being is flawed, right? That's what makes us humans and not machines. Okay? We all have our own imperfections. You date someone, maybe you found that special person in your life, maybe you're married or you're thinking about getting married, right? They may be perfect for you, but, frankly, they are imperfect. They make mistakes, okay? Keynes' solution would be you recognize the imperfections and try to fix those in the economic system, right? Marx was the one who wanted to take it really extreme, right? We need to overthrow the system and become communists, okay? But, back to the dating analogy, just because there's flaws doesn't mean you have to completely overthrow a system, right? Or break up with them and date someone else or whatnot, right? True relationship is when you see flaws in someone and you accept them, right? And work together. Now that I'm done playing Dr. Phil for a while, to start with the right side, okay? We're going to do this briefly. We don't have to go through all of them, okay? From Adam Smith in 1776, you get J.D. Say, a guy named Bentham, Jeremy Bentham, and Robert Thomas Malthus, okay? The important one is here, called Say. He had a theory called Say's Law, or a law called Say's Law, which says supply creates its own demand, okay? In other words, if you produce it, right, if you hire a bunch of people to produce things, then they have money, income, which they'll turn around and spend. They'll buy all that stuff, okay? So in other words, the key to making a country rich is to get people to, entrepreneurs, to begin supplying things, okay? So that, Say's Law, is one of the four major components of the neoclassical model, okay? The neoclassical model is the first of the three major theories we're going to look at in this course, okay? And in the neoclassical model, what we're going to end up doing is seeing that it was invented by a man named Jevons, Walras, and Menger. They were in 3 different countries all at the same time, okay? And the essential premise of the neoclassical model is that markets work, okay? The free market works, and this is an important term for the future, capitalism possesses a self-adjusting mechanism, okay? Markets will adjust to whatever happens in them to produce an optimal outcome, okay? An optimal social and economic outcome, okay? So therefore, the neoclassicals don't really have any room for the government whatsoever, okay? There should be no government intervention into the economy, possibly outside of the military, right? You need military and maybe some law and order, the police. But other than that, there's no room for government intervention in healthcare or the Obama stimulus package, okay? There would be no room for that. You don't want that in the neoclassical view, okay? Markets will adjust and things will become optimal once again. Of particular note here, okay, I always just like to point this out, the neoclassicals wrote in 1871 to 1873, okay? If we go to the left side for a minute, we see that Karl Marx wrote in 1867, okay? Now you don't have to know Karl Marx, but you should know that while he is typically thought of as a communist, and I'm not a Marxist, full disclosure, but people always know about Karl Marx, he was a communist. This is true. But he really wrote about that much on communism, and he wrote, in terms of his collected works, all the books he ever wrote, he wrote about that much on communism, and about this much on capitalism, probably more. Okay? So while he was a communist, he was always analyzing the economic system in which we live. People don't know that a lot. Okay? In 1867, Marx publishes Das Kapital, The Capital, right? And what he does in that book, to summarize, we're going to come back to him in a second, but he basically says, look, workers are exploited by capitalists, okay? And another name for capitalists could be CEOs, companies, board of trustees. And instead, what you need to do is overthrow the capitalist economic system, right? Workers of the world unite. That's the last line of the Communist Manifesto, okay? What he said is workers need to band together, okay, overthrow the capitalist order and become communist. Basically, his main message was capitalism stinks, right? Capitalism is not a socially harmonious order, okay? Capitalism stinks. That was his message. In 1867, well, along come the neoclassicals in 1871 to 1873, and the neoclassicals, as I just said to you, their main message was capitalism works just fine, right? You have these markets that will adjust if anything bad happens. There's a self-adjusting mechanism, and what will end up occurring is that a socially harmonious and optimal outcome will be produced if you don't have government intervention. Okay? The market, the free market will take care of itself. I only point this out, 1867, 1871. Capitalism stinks. Capitalism is the greatest thing ever, right? So I always like to point out, there's been extensive research done by other professors into this. Were they actually trying to produce scientific theory, neoclassicals, that is, or were they simply trying to refute Marx, right? Because once Marx comes along and says, hey, this capitalism may not be the greatest thing ever, it may be flawed, that opens the door to a lot of questions that people don't always like to be asked, right? Well, if capitalism's flawed, should CEOs have as much power as they do? Should bankers have as much power as they do now, right? Is there a role for the huge Wall Street banks? Maybe they should be downsized. These are questions we don't like to have asked. So instead, if you can come up with a theory that says capitalism is the greatest, most socially harmonious political economic system ever, that would be a very good development for some people who don't like what Karl Marx had to say. Okay? Again, full disclosure, not a Marxist. From the neoclassicals, you get a man named J.M. Clark? J.M. Clark, yeah. J.M. Clark, who creates marginal productivity theory. Okay? Marginal productivity theory essentially says your income is determined by how productive you are. Okay? How productive a member of society you are. Okay? So if you're a very productive member of society, you should have a huge income. Okay? You can see how this is sort of tied into neoclassical theory. Okay? Bankers must be really important members of society because they have huge incomes, right? To which someone could ask, one could object. This is a common objection to marginal productivity theory. Who's more important in society, doctors or garbage men? A lot of you probably initially said doctors, right? To which I would ask you this. The first time I was asked this question, I said doctors. But if there were no more doctors, sure, some people would die. Most would be people who were already not in good health to begin with, right? but some other people would die, you know, unfortunately, right? However, if we eliminated garbage men, the garbage would pile up on the streets, right? You would have disease that became airborne, you'd have rats, and all of us would get incredibly sick. At which time we would need the doctors, but the point being, the garbage men would appear to be more socially productive, right? They're the ones who keep us all away from the ER, okay? So, J.B. Clark's theory, right, which says that your economic income, right, your pay is equivalent to how productive a member of society you are. That would seem to at least have some issues, right? Incidentally, a man named Piero Sraffa, who's over here, on the left side, showed this to be internally inconsistent in 1956 and 1960. It's basically, he used the theory and just showed it's wrong. It can't even stand on its own assumptions, okay? But that's PhD level stuff. We're not going to get into that. Okay, from Clark, you come to Marshall. Okay, Alfred Marshall wrote Principles of Economics. There's a line going from Marshall to Keynes because even though Keynes is on the left side, Marshall was his teacher. Okay, Keynes started off on the right side. You know, when he was a student and when he was a young professor, he would have been on the right side. And then it was later in his life he decided to jump to the left. Okay? So that's why there's a line going from Marshall to Keynes. From Marshall, all right, I'm just going to go through these now. Okay. Let's see if I can move that over. From Marshall and the Neoclassicals, I'm going to go from right to left here. The Neoclassicals, you have the Austrians named von Mises and Hayek. They are the economic theorists for what is today libertarianism. Okay? Ron Paul, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Michelle Bachmann, Sarah Palin, all these libertarians. Their economic theory comes from von Mises and Hayek. Okay? Incidentally, during the London bombing in 1944, Hayek and Keynes, believe it or not, who were two contemporary rivals. Okay? Although when Keynes published his book in 1936, Hayek's career was essentially over. But Hayek admitted to Keynes in a basement during the bombing in 1944 that he believed Keynes was actually right. Okay? For better or worse, right? Today, a lot of people still take Hayek's theories incredibly seriously, even though he admitted to Keynes he was wrong. Okay? The supply-siders, you could consider them Reaganomics in the 80s. From the Neoclassicals, right, we have Marshall, Pigou, Robertson, the monetarists. The monetarists are a group of people who believe that printing money leads to inflation and that there is an optimal level of unemployment in the economy. Okay? They were the ones who came up with that idea, specifically Milton Friedman. Some of you might know that name, Milton Friedman. He was the economic inspiration for Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, in the 1980s. I don't know if you guys saw the movie, The Iron Lady, maybe. In the 1980s, she was the Prime Minister of Great Britain. And then Ronald Reagan, the President of the US. Milton Friedman was the economic inspiration behind much of that as well. Also, you might see the name Alan Greenspan. Okay? Alan Greenspan is a monetarist. Okay? Which you may think is weird. Devin, I thought you just said the monetarists were for Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was a Republican. Alan Greenspan worked with Bill Clinton. Clinton was a Democrat. You're right. The right side has been in charge of U.S. economic policy since at least the mid-70s. I would make the case you could go back all the way to FDR. But at least since the mid-70s, the right side has been dominating U.S. economic policy. Okay? Whether it's Republican or Democrat for the presidency, the right side has been the ones who make policy. Okay? From the monetarists, we can go, actually let's go over to here, the bastard Keynesians. The bastard Keynesians are also called the textbook Keynesians or the neoclassical Keynesian synthesis. Okay? And they have a line being drawn to them from Keynes, but it's a dashed line because despite the fact that a lot of people think they embody what Keynes said, that's simply not true. Okay? We're going to see that throughout the course of the semester when I teach you Keynes and the post-Keynesians versus the textbook bastard neoclassical Keynesian synthesis. Okay? Now, bastard is not meant in a bad way here, it's meant in the actual way the word is used. Bastard means illegitimate. Okay? I'm not the one who made this document, so I'm not the one who put it up here. But it's basically saying bastard Keynesian, illegitimate Keynesians. Okay? If you're offended by the language, sorry. It's a very, very good diagram with that stuck on it. Okay? The bastard Keynesians, or the illegitimate Keynesians, the textbook Keynesians, are a combination of Marshall and Keynes. Okay? So they come down here, they claim that they have a connection to Keynes, but they really don't. The famous ones of them, Paul Samuelson, John Hicks, James Tobin, Alvin Hansen. Okay? They're called the textbook Keynesians because they wrote all of the textbooks in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Okay? Samuelson, especially. Samuelson, incidentally, is Larry Summers' grandfather or uncle. Larry Summers worked for the Obama administration. Okay? Among other things, he worked for Clinton, he worked for Bush 1, or Bush 2, excuse me, Bush 2, George W. They're called textbook Keynesians because they wrote all of the textbooks, okay? And so in doing so, they claimed that these textbooks embodied Keynes's fundamental message, okay? He said that, look, this is a simple way of teaching Keynes. I would argue that, which full disclosure, I'm a post-Keynesian. We're going to get to that a little later. They completely missed the point. And in fact, John Hicks, towards the end of his life, admitted that, yeah, when he was a textbook Keynesian, he was missing the point of Keynes. He openly admitted he wrote an article about it. Okay? If you combine the bastard Keynesians and the monetarists, you get what's called the new Keynesians, which a lot of people like to say, it's sort of a good quip. The new Keynesians, neither new nor Keynesian, right? Because if the textbook Keynesians aren't really Keynesian, which is what Hicks said towards the end of his life, well, if they're not real Keynesians, then how could these guys be? Okay? Who makes up this group? Mankiw, Stiglitz, Joe Stiglitz, you might have heard of him. Janet Yellen, I hope you've heard of her. She's your new Federal Reserve chairwoman. Okay? Alan Blinder. Where is it? You could also, Ben Bernanke, the previous Federal Reserve chairperson, you could put him in either the monetarists or the new Keynesian group. Either would be just fine. Okay? Most of these people, have served in either the Reagan administration, have served in the Reagan administration, the Bush administration, the Clinton administration, or the Obama administration. Okay? So, I do like to stress this. Despite the fact that Reagan is thought of as being super right-wing, right? He's super Republican, and Barack Obama is thought of as some big leftist socialist, right? That's the way he's often portrayed. And Clinton was the perfect guy down the middle, right? Okay. Well, regardless of how far right or left we think they were, economically they actually all believed the same theory because all of their economic advisors are the same exact people. Okay? So ever since the 1970s, these groups, specifically the monetarists and the new Keynesians, okay, have been running economic policy in this country. So when people say, oh, Obama's a socialist, well, he's actually following the same exact economic theory that Milton Friedman was, which is Ronald Reagan. Okay? I only bring this up, we're not going to be tested on this specifically, but I'm bringing it up because it's quite important to realize when you see such virulent political dialogue in this country, right? Yet, you know, over Obama's a socialist or he's not left enough, whatever. The point is, his economic team is literally the same economic team, or believes the same economic ideas that George W. Bush believed, or George W. Bush's team believed, and that Ronald Reagan's team believed. Okay? Now, before we go to the left side, I just want to bring up one more point. It has to do with a monetary theory of production. Okay? On your syllabus, it says monetary theory of production. The right side of the diagram, okay, so the neoclassicals, the Say, J.B. Say, Clark, the monetarists, the new Keynesians, the textbook Keynesians, they all believe you can model a capitalist economy like this. Okay? They believe you can model it CMC prime. Okay? In other words, the point of production in capitalism, this is what the right side believes, the point of production in capitalism is to start with commodities. You want to start with commodities, sell those commodities for some money. That's what the M stands for. And then with that sum of money, you want to go out and purchase another commodity. Okay? The C prime, the C apostrophe, it just means that this commodity is different from this commodity. Okay? And what's a commodity? It's a good or service. Okay? Essentially what they're saying here is that the point of production in capitalism, you start with a bottle of water. You sell this bottle of water for some money. And then with that sum of money, you could purchase another commodity, this marker. Okay? So this is what the right side of the diagram believes. Okay? So remember, capitalism is a socially harmonious political economic system in which unemployment, poverty, and inequality are the fault of the individual. Okay? And you can model an economy this way. This type of an economy would be called a barter economy. I'm going to write it up because I'm not sure if this will be off screen. Okay? That's a barter economy. The right side believes that capitalism is a barter economy. Okay? The left side of the diagram, the one we're going to get to in a second, the left side that contains Marx, Keynes, Ricardo, Franklin, that's Ben Franklin, by the way, they all believe, the ones who believe that capitalism is an imperfect economic system in which poverty, inequality, and unemployment are caused by the system, or the vast majority of it is caused by the system. They believe capitalism is what you would call a They believe that capitalism is a monetary production economy. Okay? And in a monetary production economy, you can model it like this. Okay? In other words, the point of production is to make money. It's a monetary production economy. Businesses aren't interested in producing water bottles so they can get magic markers. Okay? The right side, barter economy, believes that businesses take a commodity, trade it for another commodity. Okay? So that's barter. So the right side believes that capitalism is a barter economy. Okay? In other words, businesses out there, General Motors, Ford, what they want to do is they want to produce cars so they can get their hands on stools. The left side of the chart, those who believe in a monetary production economy, believe that the point of production in capitalism is to start with a sum of money, you purchase a commodity that you can then sell for another sum of money. M prime is greater than M. Okay? You want M prime to be greater than M. That's what you call profit, which economists use the symbol pi to designate. Okay? The difference, M prime greater than M, is profit. Okay? So the point of production in capitalism, you start with a sum of money, at least for the left side. If you believe in a monetary production economy, the left side of the chart believes that you start with a sum of money and you purchase a bunch of things, a bunch of commodities you put together into a product, like a tablet. Okay? And then you sell that tablet for some money. Okay? With the goal being that the sum of money you sell the tablet for, right, is greater than the original sum of money. Right? If you sell something for more money than you started with, you make profit. Okay? So that's what the left side of the chart believes. The right side of the chart believes that capitalism is a barter economy. The left side of the chart believes that capitalism is a monetary production economy. Come on, turn it back down. Alright. It's warming up. Just bear with me 1 second. While we're waiting, I'm going to see how much time is left on this camera. left side of the table now. We have Adam Smith. Adam Smith, right, he worked on The Wealth of Nations, but he also worked on the theory of moral sentiments. Okay? And in the theory of moral sentiments, that sort of led to a bunch of people asking questions about capitalism. Is it fair? Is it ethical? Is it moral? Things like that. Ben Franklin himself asked much of these questions in his writings. Ben Franklin, for those who don't know, advocated for a lot of government intervention in the economy. Okay? He wanted the colonies, and then especially when they became a nation, he wanted them to tax imports of manufactured goods. He wanted to subsidize exports of manufactured goods, and he wanted to tax anyone who exported agricultural goods. Okay? Why? Because he believed that a nation specializing in agriculture would never be rich. And a lot of subsequent research has shown that's true. The only nations that have ever developed are ones that specialize in manufacturing. Okay? So, Ben Franklin, we think of all of our forefathers as being interested in the free market, what have you. Ben Franklin actually was a big proponent of government intervention in the economy. Okay? From there you get David Ricardo. Okay? David Ricardo could fit on both sides. He wrote some things that could make him put on the right side. He's on the left side because he was the first person to really ask, does capitalism create unemployment and poverty? Okay, that's why I placed him on the left side. Not I, someone else did it, but that's why I agree with it. David Ricardo's question was essentially this, and he was a very, very wealthy English businessman in the 1800s, the early 1800s. He died in 1829, I believe, or 1833, somewhere around there. David Ricardo asked this question. It is called the machine question. He said, okay, capitalism seems to be introducing a lot of technology, a lot of machinery into the economy, right? People used to have to build houses or buildings on their own. Now we have cranes that can lift all those things. Okay? At supermarkets, we used to require people to walk around and, check, are there enough bottles of water still on the shelves, right? You had to stock the shelves, and people had to actually check that. Now, when you buy a bottle of water, they just run it underneath a scanner. And then when you need water, the computer sends that out, okay? So are these machines causing unemployment? That's what David Ricardo asked, okay? It's this famous chapter, it's chapter 31, and it's called On Machinery, and he wrote it in the 3rd edition of his own book, okay? That question, the answer to it, the answer Ricardo gave to it was, well, it seems like capitalism can be causing unemployment through the use of machinery, but it's likely to be temporary and will not ultimately become an issue. That was what Ricardo concluded, okay? Now, of course he's on the left side because he was the first one who asked that question. Does capitalism create poverty, right? Which I said is the left side. Does it create unemployment and poverty, okay? That was Ricardo's contribution. He said, no, it'll work out, it'll be okay. People will become more educated, and then they will design new machines, etc., etc. On the other hand, Karl Marx picked up where Ricardo left off. And Karl Marx said, no way. Okay? Karl Marx said that, no, machines are going to end up replacing people. Okay? Whether he was right or wrong, you do see it around you now, right? When you go to the movie theaters, you have the option of buying your tickets from a machine, or you can go to a human, right? But you can buy the tickets at the machine. When you go to the supermarket, you don't have to go to a checkout line. You can go to the self-checkout line that's done by computers, okay? Marx really came up with two things. One, he said that will be permanent, okay? The replacing of humans with machines, okay? And he said what that'll do is that's going to throw enough people into unemployment, okay, that they will eventually become so unhappy, and there will be enough of them, that they can rise up, overthrow the system, and then they will become communist. I mean, that's Marx in, whatever, 36 seconds, okay? That is his first contribution, okay, to economics. Hence, for Marx, capitalism inherently created unemployment, okay? Just like the left side of our diagram, right? Capitalism inherently creates inequality, poverty, and unemployment, right? He said enough people will be thrown into unemployment where eventually they rise up. If you're unemployed, you're poor, right? I mean, you don't have any income if you're unemployed, so you're in poverty. Eventually there'll be enough of them to rise up and overthrow the system. Marx's other fundamental contribution is called surplus value, okay? Essentially the different surplus value is nothing more than the idea of how much gold does a miner in Chile get paid per day? Probably a couple cents, right? What is the value of the gold he's pulling out of the ground? A lot, right? I don't know, thousands of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars maybe, okay? The point being, Marx called the difference between those two surplus value, okay? A worker produces a lot of value for someone, right? For the person who owns the company. They are the ones doing all the work. They're producing the output. Yet they're only getting paid very slightly, okay? Very little. The difference between that is called surplus value. Marx said that was exploitation of the worker, okay? That's something you do see around you if you take a look, right? From Marx, there's a bunch of other guys down here, but we're not going to cover them so much, okay? We're short on time, and we're not going to deal with them in this course. But from Marx, you come to Keynes. Because like I mentioned, Keynes was on the right side, okay? But during the Great Depression, right, when Keynes wrote, 1936, okay, when he wrote The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, Keynes was looking around him, right? He's already on the right, okay? He's saying, all these people are unemployed, there's poverty. I don't think it's all their fault, right? So maybe the system itself is causing this problem. Maybe the system, maybe capitalism, is causing poverty, unemployment, and inequality, okay? So that's when Keynes sort of jumps from the right to the left side, and that's why there's a line going from him to Marx, okay? There's a line from him to Marx because Keynes wanted to reform capitalism, Marx wanted to overthrow capitalism, but they both did come to the same conclusion, that capitalism was creating poverty. The problem was the system. The problem wasn't just individuals, okay? So, from Keynes, I've already talked about the textbook, Neoclassical Synthesis, Bastard Keynesians, okay? The Eastern Institutionalists we're not going to deal with, don't worry about that, okay? The one group we do want to talk about, we've already covered the Neoclassicals, we've covered the textbook Keynesians, okay? And here we see a line going from Keynes to Robinson, and then Robinson down to the post-Keynesians. So I'm going to reorient the computer for that now. Keynes wrote in 1936. His most talented student was Joan Robinson. Okay? Joan Robinson, immensely smart. She wrote a lot of great things on her own. And from Joan Robinson, you get the post-Keynesians. Okay? The post-Keynesians consist, more or less, right, of Alfred Eichner, Jan Kregel, Ivan Minsky, Paul Davidson, Frederick Lee, L. Randall Wray, Matthew Forstater, guys like that, okay? They are the post-Keynesians, okay? There is a difference between the difference between the post-Keynesians and the textbook Keynesians, okay, would be Joan Robinson. While the textbook Keynesians, or the bastard Keynesians, were busy writing the textbooks that turned out to not actually have Keynes's message in it, Joan Robinson was busy writing not textbooks, but more academic research, right? High-level stuff, okay, that did embody Keynes's message, okay? And she passed that on to her students, the post-Keynesians, okay? The major difference between the two, as we're going to see, is how they treat investment, okay? The textbook Keynesians don't really have a theory of investment. And the theory of investment they do have isn't really what Keynes said. Whereas the post-Keynesians, the theory of investment is more or less exactly what Keynes said, okay? And Keynes took investment very seriously, right? His book is about that thick, about this much of it was dedicated to investment, okay? He thought investment mattered a lot in the economy, as 2007 and 2008 showed us, okay? So the three groups we're going to look at in this course, the neoclassicals, okay, the textbook Keynesians, and the post-Keynesians, okay? In fact, the order we're going to look at them in is we're going to look at the neoclassicals, then we're going to look at Keynes and the post-Keynesians, then we're going to look at the textbook Keynesians, okay, basically, so you had Keynes, and then where did these textbook guys go wrong, right? How did they change Keynes? And then in the final week, we're going to come back to Keynes and the post-Keynesians. We're going to talk about where the post-Keynesians are at today. Okay, what recent research has been coming out that they've done. Full disclosure, I mentioned it before, I am a post-Keynesian. This is the group I agree with, okay? Kregel was on my dissertation committee. Lee was one of my teachers. Minsky's dissertation student, Ray, is my dissertation advisor. Okay, was my dissertation advisor. Okay, so a lot of these guys I've had first-hand interaction with. I've had first-hand interaction with all of them, well, not Minsky or Eichner. Okay, but the point being, they're the ones I know the best, because that's what I agree with, and I just want to give you full disclosure that I'm not going to be, I hope I'm not biased throughout the course of the semester, but if it seems like I am, it's because this is what I agree with, okay? I disagree with, full disclosure, I disagree with almost everything the textbook Keynesians say and the neoclassicals say, okay? But that's me telling you that in advance. That's not me telling you you have to be a textbook Keynesian or a or you have to be a post-Keynesian and you can't be a textbook or a neoclassical, okay? You're perfectly fine, it's up to you, it will not impact your grade one bit. The exams are structured so that you do not have to be one or the other, right? It doesn't matter. I just wanted to give you full disclosure as we start the semester, okay? I'm going to turn the camera off right now, and when we come back, we'll do Heilbronner's economic systems, and then I'm going to go over those 2 PowerPoints of chapters 5 and 6, okay? So sit back, you can take a break right now. We've been doing this about an hour and a half between the syllabus and the history of thought tree. If you want to take a break, relax, whatever, go for it, and then we're going to come back with Heilbronner and the 2 chapters from the book, okay?